Imagine a winter morning in 2026 on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. The temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius, but the most terrifying thing isn't the cold, it's the silence. A deadly silence blankets the major routes that were once the lifeblood of an entire empire. Along the roads from Kamchatka to Krasnodar, tens of thousands of massive trucks sit motionless. They aren't moving, their engines froze long ago. And in the cabins, drivers tremble, helplessly watching as billions of rubles worth of cargo behind them slowly turns into industrial waste. This isn't a Hollywood disaster movie, this is the reality of the Russian Federation in the 2025 to 2026 period. A full-scale logistics crisis is strangling the world's largest country. From sticks of butter locked in anti-theft boxes in Moscow supermarkets to heating pipes bursting in Siberia due to lack of fuel, it all leads to a single truth. Russia is being locked down from within. Why can't an energy superpower and a military giant transport potatoes and butter to its people's tables? Why are its legendary railways drowning in debt and teetering on the brink of collapse? In today's in-depth video, we won't just look at dry numbers. We will dissect the clinical death of a logistics system and find out if 2026 will be the end of the Kremlin's stability. To understand the severity of this disaster, we must start with something Russians have always been proud of, but also feared: geography. Russia stretches across 11 time zones, from the European border to the Pacific Ocean. Historically, logistics has always been the Achilles heel of this land. But what is happening today is entirely different from the past. President Putin's pivot to the east, once expected to be a lifesaver after the gateways to Europe were slammed shut, is now slamming into a brick wall. That wall is named outdated infrastructure and stifling bureaucracy. Look at the borders with China, Kazakhstan, and Georgia. Lines of trucks stretch for dozens of kilometers, waiting in vain. The border crossings lack the capacity to process the sudden surge in cargo volume. Drivers must wait weeks, even months in the bone-chilling cold. Meanwhile, the value of their goods depreciates by the hour. Particularly hard hit is the timber export industry, the pride of Siberia. Millions of cubic meters of wood are rotting in warehouses because there is no way to transport them to ports. Factories are closing and tens of thousands are losing their jobs. The authority of a nation that once wanted to use energy to subdue Europe is now helpless on its own roads. When you cannot move within your own home, you are no longer its master. But why have the trucks stopped? Is it just the snow? The answer lies under the hoods of those vehicles. Latest reports show that Russian road transport has fallen into a stagnation of up to 40%. For every 10 trucks, 4 are sitting idle and rusting away. The reason isn't a lack of gasoline. Russia has plenty of oil. The reason is a lack of mechanical capacity. Most of Russia's heavy truck fleet depends on Western technology: Bosch brakes, ZF gearboxes, Volvo or Scania engines. When sanctions cut off the supply chain, Russia entered the era of the Frankenstein fleet. What does Frankenstein mean? Transport companies are dismantling good trucks to find spare parts for others. They are cannibalizing themselves to survive. But this tactic has a fatal flaw: it is unsustainable. When the last truck is stripped, the entire fleet will collapse. Shipments of replacement parts from China take up to 3 months to arrive. In logistics, 3 months is a death sentence. Furthermore, Russia's title as an energy giant brings a bitter paradox. Domestic diesel prices have surged by 20%. How can an oil exporting nation allow its own people to face transport fuel shortages? The answer is the war economy. Every drop of high-quality oil and every transport priority is poured into the Ukrainian front, leaving civilian routes to fend for themselves. Broken machinery is one thing, but people are also abandoning these freezing cabins. The Russian labor market is facing an unprecedented black hole. Where are the most experienced drivers, the ones who could navigate Siberian blizzards by sight alone? A large portion has been mobilized to the front lines to drive tanks and military logistics vehicles. Another part has moved to work in defense industries to be exempt from military service. And a significant number have fled the country. Those who remain? They look at the meager wages, the crumbling, unmaintained roads, and they choose to stay home. Driving a patched-up truck on a pothole-ridden road in minus 40-degree winter with a cold head and an empty stomach, that is no longer a job. It's a suicide mission. As a result, even if a transport company is lucky enough to have parts, they can't find anyone willing to take the wheel. This human bottleneck is tightening around the throat of Russian logistics harder than any sanction from Washington. If the roads are blocked, one usually thinks of the railway. In Russia, the railways, RZD, is not just a company, it is a symbol of state power. But if you look at RZD's 2026 financial reports, you will see a chart in free fall. RZD's debt has hit an astronomical milestone, $45 billion. Net profit has dropped fourfold. To fund operations, they have even had to sell off their most luxurious office towers in Moscow. Why is a state within a state in such a pathetic condition? First, it's maintenance costs. Like trucks, Russia's modern locomotives rely heavily on Western components. When Siemens engineers left, high-speed trains and heavy freight haulers began turning into shiny scrap metal. Second, the railways are overwhelmed by military trains. The priority given to transporting weapons has pushed civilian goods to the margins. Coal, grain, and construction materials sit at stations for months. When the railway fails to deliver, cargo is pushed back onto the roads. But as we've seen, the roads have already collapsed. This is a cycle of mutual destruction. The collapse of the railway drags down road transport and vice versa. Russia is like a giant with gangrenous legs trying to run a marathon while the wound continues to spread. What do all these macro logistics problems mean for an average Russian? Step into a supermarket in Moscow or Yekaterinburg in early 2026. You will see a strange phenomenon. Sticks of butter, cartons of milk, and bags of coffee placed in plastic boxes with magnetic locks, just like how people protect expensive smartphones. This is a sign of desperation. Real inflation on the streets is entirely different from the rosy figures published by the government. When a truck carrying butter breaks down in Siberia, a family in Moscow has no butter to eat. When transport costs double, the price of a kilo of potatoes triples. Russia, one of the world's largest agricultural nations, is experiencing a bitter paradox. Food is available in the fields but cannot reach the table. The egg crisis of 2024 was just a prelude. By 2026, it has spread to the most basic necessities. The Russian people are beginning to return to a Soviet-era mindset, a mindset of long lines and scarcity. Promises that everything is under control are becoming ridiculous in the face of empty shelves. Inflation isn't just numbers on the TV, it's the empty feeling in the stomach and the anxiety in a mother's eyes when she looks at the supermarket receipt. When logistics collapse, the power of the state shakes along with it. When the formal economy can no longer meet demands, people find another way. And in Russia, that other way is the rise of the shadow economy, reminiscent of the dark 1990s. Transport companies are gradually withdrawing from state control to evade taxes and road fees. The Platon fee system, once a burden for drivers, is now facing mass boycotts. Transactions are made in cash, without invoices, without control. A gray market is forming where old, unsafe trucks stealthily transport goods through back roads. This creates a toxic feedback loop. State tax revenue plummets, causing the budget deficit to grow. To compensate, the government prints more money, leading to higher inflation, which further burdens the remaining businesses with taxes. This vicious cycle is eroding all of the Kremlin's efforts at economic stability. Russia is not just facing a physical collapse, but a collapse of trust in the legal and formal economic system. We've talked about food, but there's something more important for Russians in winter: warmth. And logistics is attacking this exact vulnerability. Russia's central heating system, a massive legacy of the Soviet era, is crying for help. Why are thousands of apartments from the Moscow suburbs to Vladivostok losing heat in the middle of winter? Because thermal power plants aren't receiving coal and fuel on time. Why aren't they receiving it? Because the trucks are frozen and the trains are carrying tanks. Data from January 2026 shows that states of emergency have been declared in at least 12 regions of the Russian Federation. Images of burst water pipes and thick layers of ice inside people's living rooms have become common on social media. This is the physical cost of pouring the entire budget into defense. Funds that should have gone toward winter infrastructure maintenance have been converted into bonuses for volunteers going to the front. A nation that claims to be a superpower, holding one of the world's leading nuclear arsenals, cannot provide electricity and warm water to its own citizens. This is not just a management failure, it is a strategic failure. Because the strength of an army stems from the stability of the home front, and Russia's home front is literally freezing. Many will ask, if civilian logistics collapse, will the Russian military be affected? The answer is, nothing is completely separate. Even if the military has its own logistics lines, they still share the same rail systems, bridges, and roads with civilians. RZD's debt means that specialized rail cars for carrying tanks aren't being maintained. A scarcity of precision bearings means locomotives cannot operate at full capacity. Russia may have thousands of tanks on paper, but if there are no trains to carry them to the front, or no trucks to carry ammunition behind them, those blocks of iron are just stationary targets for drones. Western military experts predict that Russia's large-scale offensive capability in 2026 will decrease by 30% solely due to the collapse of domestic logistics. The war is now being lost at repair stations and customs checkpoints. When the soldier's stomach and the vehicle's engine both cry out for help, every command from the Kremlin becomes meaningless. We are standing at the threshold of 2026. Economic models all point to this being the breaking point of patience. National reserve funds are depleted. Physical infrastructure has reached the limit of endurance. Russia is no longer in a heating up phase, it has entered a phase of total freeze. The Kremlin is striving to open new corridors with Iran and India, but that is a story for the future, for decades from now. As for the Russian people, they need potatoes and warmth today. History has proven that Russians can endure hardship for grand ideals, but they will not accept it when the social contract is torn up, when the state can no longer provide the most basic needs. The breakdown of logistics lines is like the paralysis of the nervous system. The brain can still send signals, but the limbs no longer move. That is the current state of Russia. Goals are still set, orders are still issued, but the reality beneath their feet remains as motionless as a truck engine in a Siberian blizzard. What do you think of this scenario? Can Russia find a logistics miracle to survive 2026? Or is this the beginning of an internal collapse of a vast empire? Share your views in the comments. We would love to hear your diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our deep analyses of global geopolitics and economics. We will continue to peel back the truth behind the numbers and the headlines. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you in the next analysis.